Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. 4 dead in strikes across Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson. Russia and the West trade barbs over Ukraine at the United Nations as Russia defends its use of veto power. Plus, Germany and China call for an end to Ukraine conflict at UN Security Council meeting. Thank you for joining us. It was a night of blasts and raid alerts over Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson. Authorities sent rescue teams to at least 2 locations in the Ukrainian capital. Officials and local media reported blasts in areas including Vinnytsia, Lviv, and Ivano-Frankivsk regions, as well as a partial power blackout in Rivne, indicating the Russian attack could have targeted energy infrastructure. At least 2 people were killed and 5 others were wounded in the southern city of Kherson following Russian shelling overnight. 2 people were injured in Kharkiv as well. Western allies and Russia traded accusation over Ukraine at the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday. At the UN Security Council open debates during the annual high-level UN General Assembly, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says Russian President Vladimir Putin was betting that the world would cave in on its principles if enough suffering was inflicted in Ukraine, while the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accuses the West of catering to their greed.
It's hard to imagine a country demonstrating more contempt for the United Nations and all that it stands for. This from a country with a permanent seat on this council. President Putin is betting that if he keeps doubling down on the violence, that if he's willing to inflict enough suffering on enough people, the world will cave on its principles and Ukraine will stop defending itself. But Ukrainians are not giving up, for they've seen what life would look like if they submit to Russian control.
The collective West arbitrarily assumed the rank of arbiter of destinies of all mankind, and overwhelmed by a complex of exclusivity, began to increasingly ignore the legacy of the founding fathers. Today, the West turns to statutory norms and principles selectively from case to case, solely in accordance with its selfish geopolitical needs. This inevitably leads to a deterioration in global stability.
It was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's first in-person appearance at a UN Security Council meeting on Moscow's invasion of his country, and Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia objected to him taking the floor before the 15 council members. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama, serving as president of the 10th session, responded with a jibe at Moscow. Nebenzia went on to say the session was a show and criticized Rama for what he says was a political stance rather than an act of neutral guardian of procedure.
I must say that coming from you, all this lecture of violating the rules in this building is quite an impressive shoot. But as far as you repeated many times that the violation here is about President Zelensky speaking before the council members, there is a solution for this if you agree. You stop the war and President Zelensky will not take the floor. So what made him here important and what makes important for all of us to hear him first and then discuss is made from you, not from us. Thank you very much. I take note and will continue with our session.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky justified arming Kyiv, imposing sanctions on Moscow, and support for UN resolutions as actions to defend the founding UN Charter. The Council has met dozens of times since then, but has been unable to take any action as Moscow holds a veto. Ukraine and Western countries have successfully isolated Russia diplomatically at the UN, where the 193-member General Assembly has overwhelmingly voted several times to condemn the invasion and demand Moscow withdraw its troops.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in clear violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, is aggravating geopolitical tensions and divisions, threatening regional stability, increasing the nuclear threat, and creating deep fissures in our increasingly multipolar world. I urge all countries to do their part to prevent further escalation and to lay the foundations for sustainable peace. We are fully committed to the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. This war is already causing limitless suffering. Its continuation risks further perilous escalation. There is never an alternative to dialogue, diplomacy and a just peace. Thank you.
Now, Slovak President Zuzana Kaputova called out Russia for what she called its illegal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. During her speech at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Kaputova urges the world leaders to help end the conflict. She also asked them to take climate change seriously.
Related deaths in the world than in any. Last year, we recorded more conflict-related deaths in the world than in any year since 1994. Russia's illegal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Slovakia's direct neighbor, has greatly contributed to this rise. For more than 570 days, Russia's forces have been killing innocent Ukrainian civilians, kidnapping children, and destroying towns and cities. These challenges have one common denominator. They are human-made. And it falls to us to deliver human-made solutions. The time for talking, discussions, and promises is over. But when it comes to our planet, time for action is running out. Our cities are becoming warmer, our oceans more acidic, and our land more arid. This is a result of human-caused climate change. Discussions and promises.
President of Slovakia, Zuzana Kaputova, her German counterpart, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and China's Deputy Foreign Minister Ma Zhaoxu on Wednesday also are calling for an end to the war in Ukraine. The men were speaking at a special session of the United Nations Security Council on the Ukraine crisis. Ma assured that China is ready to work with the Security Council members to end the conflict.
It has been almost 19 months since Russia started a brutal war of aggression against its sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. Tens of thousands of soldiers and Ukrainian civilians have been killed. Countless Ukrainian children have been abducted. Russian troops have murdered, raped, and tortured. They are razing towns and villages to the ground. They are mining entire regions, turning cornfields into death traps. This war is taking place in Europe, but its repercussions are felt throughout the world. Russia has deliberately removed millions of tons of grains and fertilizer from the world market, which countries around the globe need to guarantee food security. Russia is deliberately targeting grain silos and port infrastructures. And Russia has withdrawn unilaterally from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, triggering more poverty and more food insecurity all over the world. There is no justification for that. Any claims that sanctions are hampering Russian exports of crops and fertilizer are false. There are no sanctions impeding such exports.
Meanwhile, European Council President Charles Michel is asking China to help end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. China has abstained from votes by the 193-member General Assembly that overwhelmingly demanded Moscow withdraw its troops from Ukraine and stop fighting, and its abstentions appear to reflect a bid to stay on the diplomatic fence over the war in Ukraine. Beijing has said the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries must be respected, but in a nod to Russia's unease about NATO, believes all security concerns should be addressed.
It's a crime scene, and the perpetrator is sitting in this very room. You know who you are. The Kremlin dreams of restoring the old Russian Empire. After Ukraine, who would be next? Who would be next to satisfy Putin's fantasy of the past? And I'd like to particularly speak to the esteemed Chinese representative. You have warned Russia against the use of nuclear weapons, and we welcome this. And now we are asking you, let's go further. Let's join forces to persuade Russia to end this criminal war that's hurting so many. Let's join forces to convince Russia to respect the principles of the UN Charter.
Meanwhile, Charles Michel also spoke to reporters at the UN stakeout after addressing the Security Council. He called the situation in Ukraine a crime scene, as you've just heard, and says the EU intends to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
I think it's absolutely certain there is an aggressor and there is a victim, and we are supporting and helping Ukraine to defend itself, to defend its territory. It is absolutely clear that we want to support Ukraine to defend its territory. Never we have had intention to attack Russia, and that's why it's very important that the agreement that we have with Ukraine are respected. On the EU side, we provide military equipment. The EU, together with our member states, we provide military equipment to help the Ukrainians to defend themselves and to defend their territory. Thank you.
Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has defended his country's use of its veto power at the UN Security Council as a legitimate tool of international relations. Mr. Lavrov was addressing the Security Council shortly after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky asked that Russia be stripped of its veto power over Moscow's war against its neighbor. According to Mr. Lavrov, the use of veto is an absolutely legitimate tool laid out in the UN Charter with the aim of preventing decisions that could lead to the organization's breakup. Addressing the special session of the UN Security Council focusing on Moscow's actions in Kyiv, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky lamented that the United Nations is at a dead end regarding aggression. In his words, everyone in the world can see what exactly makes the UN ineffective. In this seat in the Security Council, which Russia occupies illegally due to behind-the-scenes manipulations after the collapse of the Soviet Union, sit liars whose job it is to justify the aggression and genocide committed by Russia. Meanwhile, U.S. businessman and philanthropist Howard Buffett is concerned Western public interest in the war in Ukraine could wane in the coming year and suggested he may step up his own support for Ukraine to set an example. Mr. Buffett, whose foundation has donated hundreds of millions of dollars to Ukraine since Russia's invasion, and who is the son of billionaire investor Warren Buffett, cited the U.S. presidential campaign as one of the possible reasons why the public interest could wane.
In the U.S., we've got the campaign gearing up now for, a presidential election next year. That takes a lot of attention away from it. You have some candidates that don't support giving the level of funding that we've been giving to Ukraine. So I think it's, yes, it's a tougher fight. And but I think it goes to the point that letting the war drag on is a huge mistake. I mean, I think the U.S. and Europe have to step up even more and help Ukraine win this war and put it to an end. I mean, not just from the standpoint of how much fatigue comes down the road and how much more tired people get of hearing about it or whether they want to support it. And the campaign rhetoric is definitely going to impact that. I mean, I do have concern about whether people can maintain the level of interest in it. Particularly, I think in the U.S., one of the big drawbacks is going to be the political campaign that we're going into. And so we, as a foundation and others that are really concerned about, continuing the support for Ukraine, have to be a little louder and have to talk a little bit more about it. And that's going to be part of our strategy is making sure that people understand that we are committed to Ukraine. We're not going anywhere. We're not slowing down. We'll step the pace up if that's what we have to do.
Now, as a neighbor to Ukraine, Romania is pleading for more global attention on the Black Sea. Romanian President Klaus Iohannis used his address to lay out his country's support for Ukraine during the ongoing war with Russia. He also announced his plan to work with Ukraine over the next 30 days on a grain export control plan that will help protect Romanian farmers.
Romania is a direct neighbor to the continued war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and we acted with all our energy to bring a solid contribution to regional and international security and stability. This war demonstrated that the Black Sea needs more global attention, as it is of strategic importance for transatlantic security. Romania also stands for more efficient multilateralism alongside like-minded partners across the globe in the fight for freedom and democracy. We advance an efficient, transparent, and citizen-centered government. Romania has acted in full solidarity with the brave Ukrainian people. We will continue to provide safe haven and protect refugees coming from our neighbor, as we did for over 6 million Ukrainians who already crossed our borders. We fully support the Ukrainian peace formula as the most suitable framework conducive to a fair, lasting, and sustainable peace.
As we're reporting, after the break, at the UN General Assembly, Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, you just heard, insisting Black Sea needs more global attention. Please stay with us. Welcome to the second stretch of our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine today. South Korean President Yoon Suk is sounding the alarm again about the military relationship between Russia and North Korea, saying it poses a threat to Ukraine and South Korea alike. Mr. Yoon also added that North Korea's nuclear and missile programs challenge the peace of the wider Indo-Pacific region and across the globe. A United Nations expert is urging the United States to reconsider its decision to supply Ukraine with cluster munition, saying these could harm civilians even decades after the end of the conflict. Alice Jill Edwards, a UN Special Rapporteur, made the appeal in a letter to the U.S. government and President Joe Biden published on Wednesday. This comes days after the U.S. officials revealed that the Biden administration is close to approving the shipment of longer-range missiles packed with cluster bombs to Ukraine to give Kyiv the ability to cause more significant damage deeper within Russian-occupied territory. And now we turn our attention to our discussion with Mr. Dinas Riva, a researcher, Institute for Security Studies, Pretoria in South Africa. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. As a sounding board against the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the allies of Ukraine are the United Nations, and as a venting tool to vent and express their pure displeasure with the Russian invasion, it seems to have met expectations with the comments from Slovakia, from Albania, from the United States, from Germany. But will a more pragmatic solution to this problem emerge from this UN General Assembly, in your view?
No, I don't think so. I think we shouldn't expect anything productive or constructive to emerge from this UN General Assembly meeting, simply because it's not the right platform for these sort of developments and decisions. For the longest time, the UN has been quite struggling to deal with international issues, especially when major powers are concerned. Of course, you have the P5, which have the veto rule that they can apply when it comes to international decisions. And Russia is one of these countries. I think we should see this General Assembly meeting as for what it is, just statements reaffirming each country's position on this matter, but I wouldn't expect any massive developments or decisions being made.
You said the UN is not a platform for these sorts of decisions, but on paper, the UN is exactly the platform for these sorts of decisions. Is the origins of the UN, is that what's responsible for its ineffectiveness in mediation in conflicts such as these?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you look at the history of the UN, it emerged post-World War II, and the permanent 5 members were the victors of World War II, the USSR, US, UK, France, and China. But the world has changed tremendously since then. A lot of new countries have emerged, and for a long time, it has been acknowledged that the UN doesn't fit the purpose of what it was envisioned to be and to do. But any reform, of course, would require the backing of the permanent 5 members, and it's therefore very unlikely that we will see any change happening in this regard. Of course, as I said, the world has changed. We live in a different geopolitical dynamics. New players have emerged through decolonization. We must remember that the world looked very differently in the 50s and the 40s. So that is part of the problem, but it's very difficult to find a reasonable solution. I must say, however, that the UN does serve an important role, and of course, it is involved in a lot of international crises and challenges, and plays a very important function. It's just when it comes to conflicts and wars, and especially involving the members of the Permanent 5, where the UN seems to struggle.
If this is the case, Mr. Riva, then it's a very sad day for international diplomacy. Would you say that even the European Union seems to be stronger than the United Nations at this point?
Well, these are different platforms. And of course, the European Union is an international organization of a different kind. But I think that's precisely the point. There are different platforms that are being used to find solutions on a level, on a wider scale. However, there is a way to deal with international crises and troubles that doesn't involve the UN directly. Of course, as I said, the UN still plays a very important role, but it is handicapped by the political interests and the involvement of the major countries. So other platforms have to be employed to circumvent, to go around this issue.
I see. Okay, I bring light to this EU matter because the European Commission has been more vociferous in its outcry against Ukraine, and maybe arguably even more practical in its support for Ukraine as against the United Nations. What then, therefore, do you think is the use of this UN General Assembly meeting at the end of the day for Ukraine in this matter?
Well, for Ukraine specifically, it was a great opportunity to once again meet with some of the key allies and some of the key partners, and to discuss some of the crucial issues. For instance, as some of you know, Ukraine and Poland are having a bit of a diplomatic conflict right now. And this was another good opportunity for President of Poland and President of Ukraine to meet on the of the UN General Assembly to have a discussion and to see how a solution can be found. So in that regard, I think it's quite useful for Ukraine to engage once again with these partners to present its position. I mean, it is very important to clearly state each country's position on the matter. And again, from what I understand, Ukraine will use this opportunity to also engage with the American partners, specific partners in the US. So as far as Ukraine is concerned, this is quite a useful meeting nevertheless. And of course, outside of the issue of Ukraine, UN still serves a very important role, and other issues are being discussed, like climate change. And in that regard, of course, it serves a very important purpose.
It's interesting you bring up Poland because of that issue concerning the World Trade Organization and Ukraine taking that matter over the Black Sea grain deal to the WTO concerning Poland and Slovakia and Hungary. We know that Ukraine is in a very difficult position, but in situations such as these, what's your estimation of the Ukrainian demand for help from its allies?
It's a very unfortunate situation. I think perhaps diplomatically, Ukraine could have handled this issue in a better way, because the decision to take this case to WTO was not taken well in Poland and other countries. We also need to remember that Poland is going for the elections next month, and a lot of the rhetorics and a lot of the positioning and posturing that we see right now from Poland should be seen within the domestic context where parties are competing in the upcoming election. I think it was really unfortunate the way Ukraine handled the situation. Nevertheless, I think Ukraine needs to be aware of these internal dynamics and needs to navigate around them. We've seen a very unfortunate, I think, in my personal view, statement from President Zelensky, where he didn't name countries, but he alluded that some of the countries in their position towards Ukraine are playing the Russian into the Russian position, which was again seen as an attack by Poland at least, and was not very well received. But ultimately, I think a diplomatic solution will be achieved, because ultimately a lot of these countries have a similar strategic priorities that align with Ukraine winning the war, and at the very least not losing the war. I think a lot of it will be discussed behind closed doors, and a diplomatic solution will be reached. It's unfortunate that it had to be in this way, and all of the public discussions that are taking place are not really productive.
And back to the United Nations General Assembly, it seems the chips are stacked against Russia. It's a me against the world situation and scenario, with the exception of countries like China and Brazil and Turkey. For the countries such as those who are seeking and who seem to want to be neutral, not to say that they are approving of the war in Ukraine, should the United Nations, or maybe the United Nations Secretary General, take these sentiments on board as well to help to ease tensions and begin to fast track some sort of return to the negotiation table? Okay,
I'm sorry, it seems that there was some sort of a problem.
Okay, yes, sorry about that with the audio. If you can hear me now, I was asking that with the situation of Russia against the world, as it were, at the United Nations General Assembly, and the odds stacked against them, the chips stacked against them, some countries have chosen to be more neutral, such as China, though they're accused of being supporters, such as Brazil, though they're accused as well of not taking on board the sentiments of Ukraine, such as Turkey, who everyone seems to respect. Should the United Nations see that as an opportunity to bring Russia to the negotiation table?
This is an interesting question. I think we first of all, we need to differentiate between the United Nations, the institution, and the United Nations as a platform. So the countries are using the United Nations as a platform to voice their positions and their opinions. And you rightly said that there are a number of countries that have taken a very neutral approach to this war. A cynic might say that they're using the situation in their own geopolitical games, like Turkey, for instance, that has achieved tremendous success in the Caucasus now, a region that was previously dominated by Russia. At least Russia was a major player. China also, a country that I believe is using this war to achieve some of its broader and long-term geopolitical objectives, letting the US and the EU be involved in this war. It's, of course, I just don't think the UN as a platform, as I said, is a productive platform in that regard, in the sense that it's very politicized, and there are more than, of course, there are many members of the UN, each with its own position. As you mentioned, there are other platforms that exist and are being utilized, and I think that's precisely, if we see the end of the war, that's precisely the sort of scenario that will unfold. It is, however, important, I believe, that countries state their position. If it is a position of neutrality or non-alignment, it's not necessary for some of the countries, especially countries in Africa, to get involved, I believe, and it would serve them well to sort of position themselves as a neutral player in that regard, and play both sides and see the benefits in this relationship, in this crisis. But I don't think the UN is a good platform for any sort of resolution in that way. And as an institution, it has to be apolitical and unbiased. So in that regard, it would not be able to play that role of negotiating or bringing anyone to the table.
Mr. Riva, irrespective of Russia's invasion of Ukraine as perceived by allies or supporters of either groups, do you perceive the information coming out of the conflict as being fair in its accuracy? For instance, in the case of the Konstantinivka, I think I pronounced it incorrectly, I beg your pardon, but that location in Ukraine where about 15 people were killed because of an attack, which now by the New York Times, according to them, has been investigated to be from the Ukrainians themselves, from a mistake, friendly fire, if you like, of some sort of errant drone that hit their own people, for which they had blamed the Russians before. And now they say that it's propaganda, and they will look into that particular instance where Ukrainian people died at Ukrainian hands, but that's according to the New York Times. But they didn't debunk it. They say they will investigate it. Are we getting the true picture of things on the counteroffensive?
Look, I mean, the first victim of the war is truth, and it's not surprising that each country will try to use the mass media resources for their advantage, and of course, Russia is doing the same. Ukraine is doing the same. I think it's fair to say that even sources position themselves as being neutral and unbiased do suffer from the biases, because ultimately they have to speak to the sources, and the sources come from within the government of Ukraine or the government of Russia, which may try to push their own position to achieve their objectives. Certainly, understanding the situation on the front lines requires a lot of research. It requires the use of many independent sources and verification, and even then, you have to understand that you have a limited view of the reality on the ground. We do, however, see some of the general trends. So when it comes to specifics, it may be challenging, but the general trends seem to be more evident, and the general trends seem to suggest that Ukraine is making some advancements on the front lines. So I think when it comes to these general trends, this is where we can be more certain that we're getting a clearer picture of the situation on the ground.
Are the advancements that they're making, as you've just pointed out, significant enough to claim progress?
Well, it's, again, a very good question. I think a lot of people look at the map and they see, one part of the map shaded in red, another part shaded in blue. And if you look at the progress that was made by the Ukrainian military, it doesn't seem very significant. However, we need to remember that the map doesn't give us the full picture of what is happening on the ground. In reality, what exists on the ground are fortified points, and it is not so much about the war right now is not so much about taking the land, but destroying the points on the ground and capturing these points. And if Ukraine is successful, we may see the situation change drastically within a matter of days, where they can make tremendous advances. So right now, the whole battle is about these strategic objectives on the map, and in that regard, Ukraine has been successful in capturing a number of them, especially on the Zaporizhia region, and near Bakhmut. So that should give those who are in support of Ukraine some semblance of hope. But of course, that is not a guarantee, and it's difficult to say whether Ukraine will be able to use these advances in their advantage and proceed further. But we should be careful about the way we look at the maps, because it may be misleading.
To Africa now, where you are in the southern part of Africa, South Africa. We are here in the western part of Africa. The Black Sea grain deal expiration has exposed the need for African nations to be self-sufficient in the way of certain agricultural produce, which can be argued as to a great big question: why hasn't that happened at this time? At the United Nations, as it continues, and concerning the upheavals in the western region of Africa, with the coups that have happened and what have you, is this an opportunity for the African Union to galvanize cooperation amongst African states and regions so as to become more independent of global influence?
Well, I think this should be a priority regardless of what is happening in the Black Sea and in general. But certainly these sort of crisis situations give good motivation for regions and the continent, or should give good motivation for the region to seek less dependency and develop local opportunities, improve the situation on the ground. When it comes to agricultural questions, and by no means I'm not an expert, but of course it's not a very easy sort of problem to find a solution for. Again, different regions in Africa are experiencing a very different situation when it comes to food security and agriculture, and they face different challenges. There certainly is room for more cooperation between these different countries and regions, but at the solution, I don't think there is any short-term solution to this problem. A longer-term solution is required, but it would also be very helpful for some African states for the Black Sea grain deal to be reinstated, or at least for the grain supply to be reinstated.
Are you concerned about the continuous detention of the Wall Street Journal journalist Ivan Gershkovich in Germany? Sorry, I beg your pardon, in Russia?
It's Of course, it is a very concerning issue. It's not surprising. We've seen Russia use similar tactics before. And usually what tends to happen is if Russia has certain people imprisoned, if certain Russian people are imprisoned overseas, mostly in the Western countries, Russia tends to then hunt and imprison Americans or Europeans. And then what tends to happen is an exchange of prisoners where Russia can get some of their people, mostly agents or people who are accused of being or agents. Russia can then get these people back home. So in that regard, of course, we should all, I think, be concerned for his well-being. From the standpoint of just us as bystanders and people looking from outside, it's a very concerning precedent for a journalist to be used as bargaining chips, and it should be condemned. But it's at the same time, the fact that it is likely that they want to use him as a bargaining chip gives us hope that he will not be harmed or die in prison in Russia, because they actually need him for an exchange. And I'm sure sooner or later we will see a suggestion from the Russian side, maybe behind the closed doors, to proceed with an exchange, and hopefully he will be exchanged soon.
That'll be an interesting development. And with that, we thank you so much for making out the time to be with us this morning, Mr. Riva. Dennis Riva, researcher, Institute for Security Studies, who joined us from out of Pretoria in South Africa. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for having me.
When we return, Ukraine calls for the return of abducted children as more arrive in Belarus. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the final stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine, as we place on the front burner Ukraine-Poland relations vis-a-vis the Black Sea grain deal expiration and the expiration of the ban on agricultural produce of Ukrainian extraction to Poland. Joining us is Ini John Mekwa, Channels Television business correspondent, to make further ado of this matter. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
I was dumbfounded that they would even entertain any suggestion as to taking their close ally, Poland, to the WTO. What say you?
Well, as we always say, you cannot love another person or another country more than you love yours. I think that's just what is playing out here. It started really, subtle with the farmers complaining, and then the ban, of course, that has now expired. And Ukraine came out then to say, well, they don't have any basis to expand the ban or sustain it or renew the ban, of Ukrainian wheat, grain and rapeseed and all of that into Slovakia, Hungary, Poland and all of that. But it seems Poland is the one that's really going ahead of this. Perhaps they are the ones that are feeling the pinch even more, because we haven't really heard from Hungary, Slovakia and the other smaller countries around.
Oh, Hungary is not going to even have a problem with it. Viktor Orban is very middle space between. He's not going to
play safe.
Yeah, he's not going to make any sacrifices for Ukraine that will affect his own people too much.
Yeah. So, and I mean, if you look at it, you don't really blame them. This is a major source of income for not just their farmers, but also for the economy generally. And now Ukraine still, apart from the war, they're exploring other alternatives as ways to get their grain out to other parts of the world. And these countries are so small, their production not that much, and so they only have themselves. So when you take away what they have, then you see them, trying to get aggressive, which is what is happening here, and it's so unfortunate because the war is still on. And Poland helps with arms and ammunition to Ukraine. Now they said they're going to stop because they want to face their own defense. We know it's not because of that. It's just because of the sentiments around grains and all of that. And I don't know how we're going to find a middle ground for this, because Ukraine needs this help, but Poland obviously cannot starve itself because it wants to help Ukraine.
And hungry can't go hungry over Ukraine. I wanted to say that.
Thank God you've said it.
I've said it. So I got it off my chest.
Exactly.
So I'm fine now.
Great.
So the Russia is working on budget revenues.
Yes. So you know, we talked about how their oil revenue has dropped, and you know, their revenue generally, even their exports has dropped, and we've seen the ruble dropping also in value. So it's another ingenious way of Russia trying to kind of cover itself, the economy, against all of this. So what they are planning to do, they say it will start by the 1st of October, but you know the way things are with Russia when it comes to the media, you don't really get news out just like that. You hear it subtly, and then it's really hard to get evidence that is already happening until it really blows up out there. So they say it may start on the 1st of October, where as the ruble drops, once it goes lower than 80 rubles to a dollar, then exporters would have to remit maybe 5%, maybe 2% of that profits. Because obviously when the ruble is low in value, then you know, more people will want to buy from Russia, because that means their commodities will be cheaper.
And they'll make money.
And they'll make money, and they'll pay in dollars most likely, so it's more money for the exporters. So the government now is intending to take duties on that extra. Once it is above 80 rubles to a dollar, then they will get extra of that. Like this morning, now the ruble is 96. So that means they will tax the 16 extra rubles that is on there, you know, for them that they are gaining. And that will go to the government coffers and, you know, also help to buffer the economy or the national budget or the national purse.
So rough times for the ruble.
Yeah, rough times for the ruble, but the government looking for ways to shock all those
the system. Thanks, Ini John Mecca, Channels Television business correspondent. Please stay with Channels Television for further comprehensive business coverage on business news after this program with Ini John Mecca and Laddie Williams. In the meantime, Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the Eastern Front say they need more Western weapons to speed up their grinding counter-offensive against Russian forces, even though they report modest gains on the battlefield. Kyiv believes its recapture of 2 villages south of Bakhmut and recent fighting will help the forces advance on the shattered eastern city occupied by Russian forces since May. But troops hunkered down in a bunker near Bakhmut this week say they're still heavily reliant on Soviet-era grade multiple missile launchers and dream of receiving US-made HIMARS rocket launchers. Finally today, Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska has called on world leaders to help ensure the return of thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken by Russia, as Belarusian state media published photos of dozens of Ukrainian children arriving in Belarus from Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. Speaking on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, she stated that more than 19,000 Ukrainian children have been forcibly transferred or deported to Russia or the territories it occupies. In Russia, she says, they were told that their parents don't need them, that their country doesn't need them, that no one is waiting for them. She also accused alleged abductors of telling the children they are no longer Ukrainian, but Russian children. That is very worrying if proving to be accurate. And at that point, and at this juncture, that's it for today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.